Morning. It's Friday, the 7th of February, 2025. And I, in all honesty, uh, I don't feel so great. But that's kind of true through all of these. And this time, I'm not going to explain a whole lot. I'm just going to kind of roll into this. Earlier this morning on CBC, and whether it was the producers at CBC or if it was the BBC Hard Talk producers, they re-aired a November 2023 program of Carlo Rovelli's with an interview, Hard Talk interview with Carlo Rovelli. And towards the end of the interview, uh, I have I have this in a bad place, I guess. Oh boy, sorry. Um, Steven Sacker, Steven Sacker, uh, asks towards the end at about this point right there. I don't want to play it. I don't know what the um with all the energy, with everything going on, with all the interviews and all the things happening in the world, and in November of 2023, how much of Carl's Carlo Rovelli's energy and time, how much is he able to give to um, what's going on, and how much of that energy and time is he able to give to the ideas of the universe and white holes, to the concepts and the ideas that they began, as Steven Secker says, as they began the interview with. And and in a way, it's there's no real difference for me. And that's kind of the point, that I was very unfair with this group on the 28th of January this last year. Maybe unfair is not the right language, but also this morning, last night's CBC Ideas program, uh, Indigenous journalist calls for a revolution to address the failure of reconciliation. To me, this is a very similar conversation. And now it's a very similar practice and it's a very similar offer. And so, as I tried to pack a whole lot into this hour, I wanted to offer a little bit of a chaser. And I had some other, but this morning's programming is just so perfect. And so, if you can imagine, well, maybe I won't articulate so much. This is a visualization. NASA Goddard, some of these, I already had these links on a tab bef- from yesterday, getting ready to kind of play with some of these ideas. And I'm just using NASA Goddard's and the way they've chosen to visualize some of these things, how binary black holes might be having a relationship, or how we perceive they're having a relationship. And again, if we consider the work and the conversation of white holes and time, and the gravity of things, when things are important to us, when something's a big deal, when something's happening, when we have a great idea, when a war is happening, when somebody does an injustice, when something deserves concentration, or when somebody is very, very important. How how do we how do we tell? How do we have some of that? How do we have some of that, the of what's happening out there? How do we have any of that, what's happening out there, make sense to us? How do we know how we feel? How do we know how the light hitting a pine tree Or how do we know if a log in a river is an alligator's head or if it's a log? What is it that gives us that information that's out there? And then how do we then visualize it? So this is the USC Stevens neuroimaging, and I the few links that I'll use are just from them, good or bad. It's just a consistent. And so how do we take in? How do we hear? How do we smell? How do we see? How do we taste? How do we feel? And then heartbreak or first love or a memory or a dream or a fear or an idea, or what if we're hunting and we lose the trail of the game and our family is hungry? Where do we find the trail? And do we find it? Do we know how to look, how to take in what's out there so that we can try to find what is unseen, what's not known? So how do we take in the movement of leaves, or the imprint of whatever it might be on the dirt, on the soil, or whatever it might be, right? The sounds, the smells. How do we stop when life isn't stopping? Our game, the what we're hunting might be continuing to move. So at what point do we know that we have to take in actively because we have to keep moving, we have to keep going? So how do we know which direction to go? How do we know what to take in? And then how do we know what to make sense of what's actually happening out there? I mean, black holes are happening out there, right? I mean, so how do we know even how to know what's happening right here, like with gravity or sunlight, photons, oxygen? And so, what? How do we measure these things? How do we know how to take these things in? How were we taught? How do we feel? How do we see? And then heartbreak, being a teenager, or thumbs, right? How do we walk? What's our language that's taught? How do we know what's expected of us when we're only just learning what's expected of us? I mean, when we're born, and then we have to purge our lungs of all that fluid so that we can start breathing again. And then what? We can't just get up and start working. So how how have we all figured this stuff out? And more to the point, is anybody paying attention to it now? Has anybody ever paid attention to it before? And if things are happening out there, and if things that we're trying to pay attention to out
Radiation or
there,
gravitational waves. This
things that are paying it that we're trying to pay attention to that are out there, our sons and daughters are getting involved with people we don't want them involved with, or we're seeing somebody look at us in a way that, or we have an idea, or we have a feeling, uh, oh, I have this dream, and now I believe that this is hopeful, or oh, this administration has just come into power, and so how do we take any of that in when this stuff is it's already happened in a sense, and they're a big deal. I mean, they can be a really big deal. Like an administration can be like, oh, my administration, it's all about me. It's all about me. And it can feel like a black hole is just like it's just sucking in all the life and all the light around it because it's just so focused on being itself. But at some point, like, where does that go? Like, and then if you have competing powers, or you have heartbreak and you have desire, or you have a new love but you're still in grief, like, boom, where does that go? How do you share that? I mean, what if you're a teacher of 13-year-olds, and they're going through being 13? Do you remember what that's like? And now you're whatever age you are, going through what you are. Are you married? Are you divorced? How are your siblings, your parents, your in-laws? How are your neighbors? How are you possibly able to take any or all of this in? So when this stuff might be just happening, right? Oh, I got these out of order. Uh-oh, I got these a little bit out of order. I thought I had these kind of set up. Darn. Oh well, ride with me. It's my birthday present from you to me. Just roll with it. Okay, so if this stuff is happening all the time, right? These little bursts that are happening out there, and our satellites are picking them up. Like, how do we know that's what's happened? How do we know that's what's happening? I mean, in this instance, NASA and Goddard, they're using some imagery and they're trying to to project something that gives us an idea of how to take in the information and the data, the numbers. And so then when I think about hearing Stephen Sacker's final question there to Carlo Rovelli, and how is he able to pay attention to the war in Ukraine or political or do the interviews or give presentations on Zoom that keep people's attention and don't feel like you're wasting their time? Or how do you listen to your kids or your grandkids or your spouse? Or, oh, I'm so tired of you snoring, fix it. And it's just like, well, what can I do? But it's annoying me. But what can I do? It's annoying me. What can I do? Has anybody ever gone through that before? And how do we take that in? I mean, again, literally, how do we how do we how do we know to make sense of what our eyes are seeing? Those are our eyes. And then what are the expectations? What's the wiring that's there? What are our expectations? The social expectations when we look in the mirror or we look at other people when they look at us. How do we take in the sounds and the smells and everything else? But then how do we take in the feel of things? And how do we learn that? I mean, and if we're to take in all the stuff that's happening, oh, see, I got these out of like, if we have a political administration and boy, we feel like they just think it's all about them and they're just sucking in all the energy. And then we have a teenager who finds first love, right? And it's just exploding with all kinds of curiosity and passion. And yet with time, we've seen this happen again and again. And so how do we pay attention to that youthful that glow? And then how do we have it not just get sucked in? And even if it does get sucked in, does it stay there? I mean, how do we take in the information that's been shared before? And then are we sensitive? I mean, are we at all sensitive to these ripples of these huge huge ideas and these explosive, passionate personalities, or these personalities in administration and people or ideas, or that are like, oh, it's all about us, it's all about me. And so, how might those be perceived, right? I mean, when they're all happening at the same time, and then maybe your in-laws, there's a death, and then maybe there's a birth. And so you have these incredibly huge things. You have personalities and teenagers falling in love, or maybe teenagers are going through first heartbreak. And then there's a cancer diagnosis, and then there's grief. And then the neighbors are going through the same things. And it's like all these things are screaming at each other because they're just trying to hone in on where each are in the universe. And yet we're all kind of reflections of stars and black holes, of things trying to just focus on what is most important to us. And at the same time, sometimes doing that necessarily means that we're so attracted to one another, that we get so attracted to one another. I mean, how do we know what that is? How do we know to take in white holes and wars and universe and speaking engagements, and then what our body's doing to us? I mean, how do we take in what our eyes and the light from 8 minutes and 20 seconds ago from the sun? and then the warmth on our skin, or watching the cat or the dog sit in that sun, or being able to, again, like, okay, how do I do this? Where am I in this? All right, hold on, just a breath. Okay, this is just a little piece of driftwood, right? I found it in a creek, a river in British Columbia, and it was in a few inches of water, and it had a neat kind of shape and everything. And so I picked it up and I was kind of looking at it, and then you see there's a stone that's in that. And now, if you have a chance to just stop and think about it, like allow those 8 minutes and 20 seconds of sunlight, allow that to travel, and then you think, how how many how much of that it had to feed the trees, that it had to work its way through, that it had to do all it did, and it caught that. And then things were also at the same time stable enough to allow that all to grow in and grab that. I mean, how how do we know? And so if what we're doing is taking in grief of, the diagnosis that we have of, a little bit of cat hair, the grief that we have of the diagnosis, right? Or somebody that we love and we've lost, or we remember the heartbreak or the wrong that was done us when we were 17. And how do all those 8 minutes and 20 seconds of sunlight coming from the sun and the photons getting to the surface and then making their way to Earth, and then wherever they hit Earth? I mean, this isn't a two-dimensional, this is 3D. And so over all that time, there's this intricacy of language, and there isn't one way to do it. And how one spruce knows and one branch, and how one river system and one stone, how one leaf knows how to take it in. And again, this, you know, there's so many rocks, there's so many neat things to find, but all the things that had to come together for that to happen. And you know what I noticed? I just noticed the funny little face. I just noticed the funny little face sitting in the river. That's what I noticed. I didn't see the rock or appreciate the dynamic of all it took for those different things to come together and to be together. What did I notice? My eyes and the light through the water. I saw the funny little face. You see the eyes and the little nose and the little mouth? I mean, how did I know how to take that in, right? I gotta hit that light. So how does anybody stay sensitive? How do we work hard then also to know how to take any of that in? Actually, before I go back to those screen shares, I want to do this. So as part of the presentation on the 28th, I shared a recommendation that some MC Richards and centering uh, is something that may want to orient themselves with. In particular, this quote: education is personal. At the outset, I lay my cards on the table. I speak about my life, my history, my interests, my activities, my tastes and limitations, my point of view, my intentions. I ask for similar candor. The world is bigger than one's teacher, and no one knows this better than I. But sometimes there is in a classroom a kind of mock piety, which pretends that everything important is being done there. Ridiculous! I try to destroy the falsely routine and to create a fresh and mutual respect. I work at both poles, reassuring and inciting. I want the students to be spontaneous and energetic. At the same time, I want them to be sensitive and aware and composed. I want them to be on fire. At the same time, I want the flames to be healing. I want the flame of life out of which the phoenix is born. Fire in the stone, which purifies, transforms, enkindles. And then what I did is I tried to pack so much into that, bless their hearts. And then I wanted to, and I quickly tried to finish with, as that quote, I want us to be on fire. I want the flames to be healing. I want the flame of life out of which the phoenix is born, fire in the stone, which purifies, transforms, and kindles. And later in that chapter of pedagogy and centering, MC Richards says to live life at the center, to incarnate at the center, so that one's limbs move with that fire, to project ourselves into space. This is theater, flight, daily deed. We do project ourselves into space, consciously or not. In our pedagogy, we practice an alchemy which draws its fire at that center. So let's go back to a couple of those. So, how do we know what's happening out there? How do we know when something is of super gravity? What is it that it reflects back to us that says, I'm important? It's about me. And if it's so much about me, how does it have, how does it put out anything for us to know that's what it is? And so, what about grief? I mean, what if grief for elephants and whales, for dogs, for humans, over all relationships, what if it's a black hole, right? And what if first love, and what if whale is its own star or black hole, or it's its own entity? Not like Plato's, I don't mean like that. But what is it that we use to project out into what's going on out there? How do we know whale? I mean, doesn't whale know whale or dandelion or human being, auntie, child, baby? I mean, how do we know heartbreak, right? Or indigestion, hope, possibility, grief, angst? How do we know about any of those? And the forces, the energy that are at play, I mean, come on. And so as we're playing with exactly the same conversations with that Carlo Rovelli is having, and as we're respecting and trying to find ways to continue to learn and relearn, to be present in the experiences that people are having right now, today, the conversations from the last few weeks, or those that energy has been having and playing with and putting off for a really long time. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to see it, to make sense of it. And so there's, in a sense, this idea that ideas can be seen, or that we can have a concept, a framing, a model of some of these same things like black holes or galaxies or stars, like our own star or Mars. Or and so how does it work when we have memories or expectations or siblings or no siblings, and then we have successful aging and graduation? And what is it to be attractive? What is it to be short, tall? What is it to be a man, a woman? What is it to be a scientist, a researcher? What is it to be what? And then heartbreak and grief. And how do we know? I mean, how do we orient ourselves at all in this? And when we're told, like, this is the way it is, and here's the map, and here's what a big deal is. Well, okay, there's the sun. That's a big deal. And then we orbit the sun. And then we learn about these things that, are black holes. And then, how big they are. And how do we tell what they are? And how do we know what a black hole is, or dark energy, or speculate about white holes? I mean, how do we sit around thinking about, well, I wonder if gravity and black holes give us evidence to consider, and then not have our heartbreak, right? Or our grief, or or whatever it might be, right? We get hungry, or we have to go have diarrhea, because we had some crazy food that we maybe in a place that was, because we're trying to conceptualize these really big ideas about how the universe is made. But then how do we stay present? I mean, at all. I mean, here's a guy, Carl Jung, right? I mean, he was kind of known for some things over time. And then one of the things, and I'll just kind of drop down that, as a kid, like, how do you know what you're experiencing when your body or your health or your expectations are telling you that this is what's happening? And then your blood flow, and then pituitary glands, and oxygen, and water, and then hunger, and then you overhear people that you might esteem, or you might hear people that you don't like, and they say, what is this kid gonna do? How is he possibly going to earn a living if he's not able to use the intelligence that he has? And so what about the intelligence of somebody like Saint Exupery, right? And so he writes The Little Prince, I think the most translated book. And in The Little Prince, the dedication is to someone who is 22 years his elder, to Leon Worth. I ask children to forgive me for dedicating this book to a grown up. I have a serious excuse. This grown up is the best friend I have in the world. I have another excuse. This grown up can understand everything. Forgive my emotions. Even books for children. I have a third excuse. He lives in France where he is hungry and cold. He needs to be comforted. If all these excuses are not enough, then I want to dedicate this book to the child whom this grown up once was. All grown ups were children first, but few of them remember it. So I correct my dedication to Leon Worth when he was a little boy. And so then Exupery disappears over the Mediterranean in 44. And the man to whom the book is dedicated, he doesn't see the text for 5 months after his friend's death. So how do we know a black hole or a supernova is being consumed, right? I mean, how do we know that what we hear or what we see or what we smell out there, how do we know it's good advice? How do we know it's something that we should believe in? How do we know how to look at, you know, oh yeah, this is here's graduation, and this is how things were in that year for this family and that person, and we can look back at a photo album or a yearbook, or here's exactly how this one vacation was when little Johnny had this accident and so got sick, but then we got word that so and so back home was having this, and so we tried to change our plans because this happened, but then the flight got delayed. And so there's all these huge things that have their own relationship with one another, and at the same time they each are like, I'm grief, and you, all you stars and all you black holes and all you heartbreak and all you hopes and all you fears and all you dreams, I'm grief and focus on me. Or first loves, right? I mean, how many 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? I mean, whatever ages, you can be older. It doesn't matter the age. Like, what is first love? I mean, ultimately, what is first love? So something that has helped me, and I wasn't necessarily going to bring this up quite. I've had to learn from many before, and that's kind of what I finish, and I might share that here again in a few minutes. But that's kind of what I finish um, the event on the 28th, trying to pack in right at the end. Because for me, for years, since the 90s, it was being suggested to me that the universe that I was going to continue to age in and to grow up in, that where I happened to be born in, if I was going to focus on me, if I was going to really hone my ability, if I was going to cause effect in the world, like Stephen Secours talks to Carlo Rovelli about, like make a difference in the world, what in what world was I going to be aging into? And were others going to be aging into that? I mean, how many others were going to be turning 28 or 33? And in my lifetime, I mean, I'm born in the early 70s. So what realistically could I try to take responsibility for? I mean, very much in specific respect to the ideas program with Brandy Marin yesterday and this morning. Very much specifically in respect to the work that CBC and CBC Ideas and those producers have done over time, to that work of Wade Davis, to the Massey lectures. I mean, think of how many stars and black holes. Think of how many administrations. Think of how many emotions and events. And so now, where on earth are we with all of this right now? I mean, where on earth are we to make sense of what administration or a state or an economy or a technology is? Pay attention to me. This is the most important. Well, I mean, have not have not human beings gone through some of this? Haven't we paid some attention to wars and to emotions and to aunties and uncles before? And so if we're going to be professionals today, excuse me, and we're going to pay attention to sunlight and to the gravity of all the things that we're expecting 3-year-olds, 3-month-olds, 13-year-olds, 33-year-olds, 53-year-olds, happy birthday. What am I really to do to take it all in? I mean, really, how am I to feel about it? So why not? Let's let's do this, and then I'll say a few things, and then we'll finish this recording.
My Own Trail by Howard.
Uh-oh.
My Own Trail by Howard.
Published by the Alaska Native Knowledge Network, 1998. Forward. When Fairbanks was established just upstream from the confluence of the Chena and Tanana rivers around the turn of the century, it was settled by people who, for the most part, maintained their roots elsewhere. The newcomers tended to view interior Alaska either as a temporary adventure or as a source of potential riches that could be extracted and taken back to whence they came. While many grew to appreciate the beauty of the surrounding landscape and learned to respect the awesome forces of nature in the far north, few made the region their lifetime home or expected to be buried here. Nearly 100 years later, most newcomers to the Tanana Valley, as well as many who have stayed long enough to outlive the label Chichaco, would still have to be considered transients, inextricably linked by history and family to other places called home, to where they are inclined to return for the holidays and where they expect to retire and be buried. While a growing number of outsiders are finding strong enough economic, aesthetic, or commercial reasons to sink roots and develop a sense of place here in interior Alaska, Fairbanks remains a tenuous form of community, made up as it is of the many different notions of community and individualism that people bring with them. It is in this context, and from this perspective, that much of Fairbanks' history has been written, and in which many of the decisions regarding events and institutions in the community have been made. Yet in the midst of this same landscape and in the span of the same century, and many preceding, there have been another people with another view of the surrounding world that is built upon a long-standing and intimate relationship with the rivers, hills, trees, and animals of the Tanana Valley. The Athabascan people, who have occupied the interior region for well over 10,000 years, have developed a sense of place that is deeply rooted in cultural traditions and in spiritual ties linked to the natural environment on which they have always depended for their livelihood and their life. The hills, creeks, bogs, and sloughs that show up under English names on the USGS maps of the area take on new names and significance when referred to in the stories by Athabascan elders. While it may be the far north from an outsider's perspective, interior Alaska is down home for the people whose ancestors are buried here and few have reason to go elsewhere for any extended period of time. While 1902 was viewed by settler population as the year Fairbanks was born,
It had a different significance for the people who lived in the small village of Chena, a few miles downstream on the south bank of the Tanana River. The river boats that brought supplies upriver for the interior miners were also carriers of new diseases for which the native people had not developed immunity, and to which many succumbed, as flu and measles epidemics spread across the state. Thus, it was in the summer of 1902 that a new community grew on one side of the Tanana, while an old community went into decline on the other. Today, the only person living on the south side of the Tanana River between Fairbanks and Nenana is Howard Luke, and it is his rendition of the life in the Tanana Valley over the past 70-plus years that is contained in this book. Howard provides us with a first-hand account of what it has meant to him and the people with whom he has been associated to live through the vast changes of the past century. Though he is alone as far as immediate family is concerned, he has a vast array of extended family and friends who look after him on one hand, while he looks after them on the other. In that respect, he is never alone. Howard is a person of his own kind, who has walked his own trail, but who has found ways to bridge and blend aspects of two worlds to form new opportunities that are of benefit to people from all walks of life. A visit to his camp across the river is like stepping back and looking forward in time simultaneously. A short walk through the woods takes you past historical cemeteries to the remnants of the old village of Chena. Nearby, you will see the trails where Howard continues to trap and hunt, and in the summer you will find him tending his fish wheel or set net and hanging fish to dry. The centerpiece of the camp, however, is the new hexagonal log structure that he has erected with the help of many donations and volunteer labor to provide a meeting place for people to share and learn from one another. His Galeya Spirit Camp has hosted numerous events over years, with native and non-native people coming from as far away as New Zealand to experience life in a traditional Athabascan setting and to learn the contemporary value of Galeya, showing respect for all things. It is readily apparent throughout Howard's book that he has high regard for education in all forms, and he has dedicated his life to that end, offering his services to schools and community organizations throughout the Fairbanks area. In recognition of his contribution to education, especially for Native students, the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District named its new alternative high school after Howard Luke, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks has awarded him an honorary doctorate. He continues to visit the school that bears his name and donate his services on a regular basis, serving as an inspiration for the teachers as well as the students. While this book will be enjoyable reading for anyone, it is an especially valuable resource for people who consider the Tanana Valley their home. Through Howard Luke's eyes and words, we see the land and the people who inhabit in the context of a personal history that is in some way unique, while in others, universal. He offers an opportunity to gain a deeper sense of meaning of this place to the people for whom it is home, not by choice, but by birthright. From this we can all benefit, and for this we owe Howard and Jan Steinbright Jackson, who helped prepare the manuscript, a debt of gratitude. Bahaseh to you both. Ray Barnhart, Center for Cross-Cultural Studies, University of Alaska, Fairbanks.
This is My Own Trail by Howard Luke. And so indeed, right? Like, where are we to make sense of this? I mean, literally, when we're to look at a branch or a piece of wood, or to look at someone crying or someone hurting, how do we take in? How do we take in the light or the gravity? How do we take in grief? What do we know to be what? And have humans figured that out ever before? Do we know what we're talking about? And so that finally is the offer. And it's the presentation, it's the theater, it's the seats, it's the admission ticket, it's the infrastructure, and then the curtain closes, and then we all got to get up, and then we all got to get on. And there are implications to that, just as there are for black holes and neutron stars. And so the ripples that we feel and that we're sensitive to, it may not be trying to chase the grief or stay away from the heartbreak. It may be just trying to hone in on where we are in that, and where our shoulder and where our disease and where our hopes and our interests and our Like there's so much available to us to take in, to feel, to look at, that we have to learn and allow ourselves to learn that relationship on how we each then do that. And so for so many right now in the Europe and the UK, in North America, US and Canada and Australia, in what were essentially the baby boom generation from World War II, and the balance of the weight of human beings from rural to urban, being more associated with urban environments than rural, roughly in some point in 2008. The baby boom generation, then post-war, World War II, the victors, that population turning 65, the expectations, the entitlements, and what infrastructure was there. And so then 10 years after that, 10,000 people turning 65 every day in the United States starting 10 years ago. And now, so when we get to focus on our specialty, on our interests, on our cares, on how we are orienting ourselves with the gravity of everything happening, we also get to respect the fact that so much is happening, that to get to control, to pay attention to what we can, to relate with others, to help us hone where we are in that. And that may be something to ideas and fears. It may be something to those white holes. And that in that, grief and heartbreak and everything has its place, and nothing is destroying something else. But we're in this flow, we're in this dance. And so, with that, many blessings. Happy 7th of February, 2025. Happy birthday, Rainy.